Good evening. Tonight is Monday, August the 8th, 2022, and this is the City of Gahanna Committee of the Whole. Tonight, on our first item under discussions, is an economic development training series. It's our second program in this series. And tonight, I will let Director Strum make introductions and take it away.
Good evening, and thank you, Councilwoman. With me this evening is Senior Vice President for Economic Development for One Columbus, Matt McAllister. As a little bit of background, as part of our program, and as a reminder, 2 weeks ago we talked a little bit about back to basics and talking some of the incentive programming that Gahanna has here. My thought process was to bring in one of our experts now from the region, and over the next few weeks, we'll be bringing in other guest speakers to talk through various elements of economic development. This evening, we're going to talk a little bit about regionalism and projects and how some of these larger projects that we've come through this office and council chambers really come together. And so Matt was kind enough to join us this evening and share some of his 20-plus years of experience in this field. Please, no sharing of stories from our travels internationally, as he and I did some foreign direct investment travels previously. So with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
As Nate mentioned, my name is Matt McAllister. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Economic Development with One Columbus. We're the regional economic development organization that represents the 11-county Columbus region. And, okay, perfect. I have some slides I'd like to share with you this afternoon, or this evening, I guess.
Not quite. I'll give you an after, yeah. There we go. Perfect. There we go. Well, as you can see, this is the 11-county region to the left. On the right is the One Columbus logo, as well as the Jobs Ohio logo. And I put this up here because One Columbus is actually a network partner with Jobs Ohio. And what that basically means is we're under contract with them to provide services within the 11 counties. And those services include everything from helping companies understand incentive programming to providing actually access to the incentive programming. We also do joint economic development activities like marketing and promotion of the region. And all 88 counties fall within a regional group. And there's 6 regional groups, so we're one of the 6. And we are quite successful as a region and a regional group. Currently we have 2.25 million people in the region. We're number 1 as it relates to job growth. We're number 1 as it relates to population growth in the Midwest. We're actually number 1 as it relates to GDP growth in the Midwest. And this is among all major metropolitan areas in the Midwest United States. So as a region, we've done quite well. And this is from a period of about 2010 to 2021. So I'll talk a little bit about, our vision next. But, in 2010, when One Columbus was formed, it was actually Columbus 2020 at the time. And it was named 2020 because it was a 10-year strategy. About 2018, we reached our goals. And prior to the formation of Columbus 2020, we reached out to a lot of our public sector partners and our private sector investors. And we asked them, what's the most important thing that we need to do as an economic development organization in the region? Because we were a newly formed group. And they said, we need jobs. That's the most important thing. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We're coming out of a recession, and it was the most important thing. We thought that if we could just get the jobs that we had prior and some net new jobs, we'd be in a much better position than we were in the prior 10 years. Well, by 2018, we'd reached our goals, and they were very bold goals. So we started our conversations again with our local partners and communities and our private sector investors. We asked, what's the most important thing for the next 10-year strategy? Because the 10-year strategy worked out really well. It's the first time we'd ever had a 10-year strategy for a regional perspective. And we tried some 3-year strategies, some 5-year strategies, but we never had a 10-year long-term view. And the common theme that came up was prosperity now. We'd been successful in creating jobs, but clearly there were some people that were left behind. And the idea became, what if we could become the most prosperous region? What if we could continue our growth trajectory as a region and not leave people behind?
what if we could continue our growth trajectory and not end up in a housing crisis like a lot of other high growth markets have been in? So that was really behind the vision. And our action plan, our strategic plan didn't change significantly as far as the initiatives, but the examples of the activities that I'm going to give you have changed significantly. So first and foremost, we kind of shifted gears. We always led with our number one priority was to attract new industry to our market. Well, we decided that it was probably most important to support our existing businesses first and foremost. And we do that in collaboration with Director Strum and our other local economic development partners by starting the year creating a target list. And that's what we had done historically. But now we're much more smarter about the way that we're generating opportunities. We have a research team that is constantly evaluating earnings reports. They're tracking companies that receive injections of capital, maybe private equity, maybe a merger, an acquisition. And we're reprioritizing and restacking our target industry and target BRE list, or business retention expansion surveying list, constantly, so that we're going after the companies that might have the highest probability of either having an opportunity or could be at risk of flight. So that became our number one priority, and it continues to be today. Of course, we do still believe in attracting new industry as well. We think it's critically important to continue to revitalize and diversify our economic base companies here, because a perfect example is Intel. We're bringing in a completely new industry that has a completely new supply chain, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and the impacts it's having on our pipeline. But it's bringing in just a massive injection of wealth and opportunity into our region at a time when some of our companies that have been historically very strong are starting to falter. So it's continued to, this idea of continued evergreening your economy is critically important as well. So while we are focused on existing industry number one, we still strongly support and have a lot of activities around business attraction. I'll talk a little more about an example of business attraction in a minute. Obviously, we want to support entrepreneurship as well, and the high growth firms that are in our marketplace. And we do this predominantly through relationship with Rev1, other VCs and accelerators in our region. We partner with them so that as they have companies that are coming off of their support and might be in a position where they can leverage some traditional economic development incentives, we can seamlessly take them into that and help them grow. And when they're ready to do that high growth mode, they're going to add 20, 30 people, then they start to qualify for a lot of the programming that we have access through Jobs Ohio. And we can interject that programming into them and continue to see, this number one, stay in our region. Because if we don't do that, a lot of them will leave. They'll follow where capital is because they're still in that early phase where capital is critical. And we also have access, though, the pandemic has born a number of new programs through Jobs Ohio. One of them is an inclusion grant program. And this is a program that's small grants made to minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, disability-owned businesses, or businesses that are in underperforming markets. And this gives us a chance to engage with companies that historically we didn't really have a suite of programs for, tools to help. Now, it is smaller, it's $25,000, $50,000, but that could buy a piece of equipment for a company, and it can make a difference. And as a matter of fact, it has made a difference. We've actually had some companies that had received inclusion grants early on that have already qualified for some of our traditional economic development incentives because they've been able to parlay that into growth and the kind of historical information they need to qualify for some of our traditional incentives. But this is a great program, and it's one that, as I mentioned, was born out of the pandemic. And it has opened up a whole new line of opportunity for us to engage with businesses that historically we wouldn't be able to support. Preparing communities for the future. This is actually where most of my time is personally spent. I have a program called Prepare Communities Win, and it's really about helping communities, one, making sure they have a strategic plan. Every community, we want to have a strategic plan. I know you guys do, but not every community does. And we want to support the development of strategic plans and the continued development of strategic plans. We have a number of our partners right now are kind of saying, okay, we've got a plan, but Intel is such a large project. Should we be thinking about how that could fit into our community, or how supply chain could fit into our community. So, that continuation is also something we would support. We have programs to support speculative development, buildings, sites. This is the Ohio Site Inventory Program predominantly, but it can provide up to $5 million of funding through grants and loans to support the development of speculative office and industrial space in our market. And again, this is something that was born out of the pandemic as well, because many of our communities, the developers put the brakes on their developments during the pandemic. And this was a program designed to kind of loosen up some of that pipeline. Now, we've been fine with our bulk industrial development in our region, but office came to a complete stop. So we've been able to support 2 office projects, and we have 2 in our pipeline right now of great projects that, but for this program, probably wouldn't have moved forward. So that's just an idea of kind of how we're engaged with our pair communities when, I would mention too, we also have some educational programming, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. Increased global trade and investment. This goes well beyond our efforts to attract international business. We do trade support as well, and we have infrastructure development here. So things like developing air cargo, international air cargo, in collaboration with Rickenbacker. Critically important because during the pandemic, Rickenbacker became a hotspot for bringing in PPE and other products. Now, we've used our OSIP program to support the development of a pharmaceutical handling facility there, and it's being built out right now. We'll be able to bring in pharmaceuticals now into our market. It'll be FDA approved facility where they can come off the plane and they can go directly into warehouses. We have a number of pharmaceutical related warehouses in the Rickenbacker area. Or they could even come up to Gahanna if you have a pharmaceutical company here, or in New Albany, or Dublin. So it's a great asset, and it's just an example of how we're trying to continually think about how we fit into the global economy, and how we can invest in ways that we can leverage our position. And then obviously, one of the things we're really well known for is a lot of our marketing and promotion of the region globally. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So first, I want to talk just a little bit more detail about attracting new businesses. And we have a lot of different strategies, but we have one that's called account-based marketing. And I thought that was one I would focus on for today, just to give you an idea. So this is a program that we identify key companies that we want to pursue. And we identify contacts within those companies. And we have a firm that then starts communicating with them. Everything from, this is a couple LinkedIn advertisements that if they were to just happen to be on LinkedIn, they would see, because we prioritize individuals within companies that we want to see our ads. And they might receive a mailer. They might receive a direct phone call. The whole idea is we have an idea that these companies are in growth mode. And they typically fall within the 4 sectors that are identified here. So gene and cell therapy, electric vehicles, semiconductor supply chain, and financial services. 4 years ago, probably, we wouldn't really have a chance in either of those first 3. We were not on the charts for gene and cell therapy. But because of what's going on at Nationwide Children's Hospital right now, we are. We've actually had a number of wins. Andolin, Sarepta, Forge Biologics. And these are companies that are located all around our region. And they're actually doing pharmaceutical production, gene and cell therapy production. Electric vehicles, this is predominantly associated with Honda. It's going through a transition right now. Quite frankly, it's one that we could parlay into opportunities, or it's one that we have risk. They could choose to do more of their electric production in Indiana or Alabama. Now, we feel like we've got a good shot at it, and that's one of the reasons we're targeting a lot of their supply chain right now that's in the electric vehicle business. Semiconductors speaks for itself. Again, 2 years ago, we probably would have been laughed at if we were trying to recruit the companies we're talking to today. But not only are we talking to them, but they're in our pipeline now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is just an example of kind of how we work. We're very precise in who we're trying to attract and the way we're going about it. We're tailoring messaging to individuals, to industries, and it's yielded tremendous results for us. I mentioned in our Prepare Communities Win program, one of the things we're doing is providing educational opportunities. for our local economic development practitioners. And this is just a slide from one that we did recently. If you're not familiar with Small Nation, they're in downtown Bell Fountain. They're an amazing organization. They have about 40 buildings in downtown Bell Fountain that they've renovated or are in the process of renovating. And they have created loft apartments. They've created office environments. They've recruited restaurants, co-working space. They have basically turned around downtown Bell Fountain to the point now where a lot of the buildings that aren't owned by Small Nation are being heavily invested in. And it's an amazing story. Matter of fact, it's such a great story that they're consulting now with a number of cities across the United States. And they did a half-day program with our local economic development professionals and opened up their doors and basically did a downtown development strategies seminar and brought in a number of the businesses that they had recruited to talk about why they ended up choosing Bell Fountain. And then they talk about how they worked with them, how they engaged with them, and their model. And I think it's a model that's replicable all across our region, all across the state, all across the Midwest, quite frankly. And they're finally getting some of the recognition they deserve because of what they've done at Bell Fountain. And now they're being hired by a lot of other cities around the Midwest to advise them. As it relates to marketing and promotion, so this is something that we do as well. And this is something that's critically important, not just to help those that we've already located, but this is how we get most of our word out as well to companies that may not be on our target list, but may say, wait a minute, that's interesting. I think I might want to think about doing something in the Midwest. And if I'm thinking about the Midwest, why not think about the Columbus region? So our focus here is predominantly maintaining top-of-mind awareness as a premier business location. That's kind of our overarching goal with a lot of this advertising. This is just some examples on the screen here. But we're also looking to elevate the Columbus region by showcasing the businesses that are here and the people that have moved here as well. And our tactics include, everything from social media to public relations. We do national, local, national, and international PR. And I think that we probably get the most activity through our social media posting. And it's something that's really taken off in the past couple of years. I think during the pandemic, so many people are on social media now. And it's predominantly LinkedIn and things like that for us, that it really tells a great story. It's a great venue for us. And not to mention, we can also continue to target using that application. So it's really something that we're proud of, and we've really elevated the view of our region. In the Intel announcement, I could probably show you 20 pages of headlines that we've received based on that project alone that have parlayed into so many other projects for us at this point. So this has resulted in tremendous success for us just this year. And if you look at this, we talk about our successes with Intel and without Intel for a reason. Intel is an anomaly. We're not going to have it every year. It's once in a lifetime. It's once in a generation type of investment. So we think that it's important to show how we're doing without Intel, but obviously acknowledging that it's going to be a banner year for us, predominantly because of Intel. So without Intel, year to date, we've had 30 successful expansions or new locations in our market, 3,600 jobs committed, $900 million in investment, and $264 million in payroll. Just to put it in perspective, our goal each year is 6,000 jobs, $1 billion in capital investment, and $330 million in payroll. If we do that every year, we're going to reach our 10-year goal of 60,000 jobs and $10 billion in capital investment and $330 million, or $3.3 billion in payroll. So with Intel, though, you can see the numbers are off the charts. We've already reached our annual goal of investment times 2 with one project. And that was pre-CHIPS Act passing. CHIPS Act is going to get signed tomorrow, and that's going to accelerate this project. So it could even be larger and more quickly than we anticipated. And we also have a lot in the pipeline. So we project each quarter what we think is going to close by the end of the quarter. And you can see here we have 12 additional projects, which is going to keep us right on track, even without Intel and meeting our annual goal. And again, those are stretch goals. Those aren't easily attainable goals. During the pandemic, we had a year where we had 2,000 jobs created. And so, I mean, this is 6,000 jobs is a bold goal. In Gahanna, over the past 18 months, I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at the same context. We've had 4 projects, 3 expansions and 1 new location, 145 jobs committed, stimulated a total of $24.9 million and $9.4 million in payroll. And I know we've got a couple things in the hopper. So I think that it's going to, we're going to continue to add to this year. And I'll just conclude with a little bit on our pipeline because, this is where this is the edge of the sword for us. If our pipeline's down, it's going to result in fewer attraction projects, fewer expansion projects down the road. And so I just thought it might be kind of interesting to take a look at this. We currently have 118 projects. Now, 120 is pretty much where we max out. And so, 100 to 110 is where we typically are. But I will say, if we took the Intel-related projects out of here, the supply chain, we would probably be in the low 90s, maybe mid-90s projects. And I think that's a lot to do with the current economy. I think that some of our projects are putting on the brakes. There's fears, are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? And I can't answer that, but I can tell you that some of the companies are starting to pause that we're talking to. And but for Intel, our pipeline would be down pretty significantly right now. So not only is this a project of unprecedented magnitude, it's at the right time for us. It very well could pull us through if we are, in fact, going to enter into a recession or even just an economic downturn. It could pull us through that. So we have 118 active projects. Like I said, probably around 20 of them now are projects associated with Intel supply chain. Another 4 are projects that are not associated with the supply chain, but are interested in our market because of Intel. So they're not part of the supply chain, but they're part of they might use an Intel product or something. 62% are attraction projects, which again, we were down to 50-50 before Intel. 50% attraction, 50% expansion projects. We've had 102 projects created this year. 60% are manufacturing or bulk industrial, and I'll tell you the bulk of those, all except for 6, are manufacturing. So we have a lot of manufacturing in our pipeline right now. 39% are international, and 18% are what we call high impact projects. These are projects that either are going to commit to create 500 jobs and or $500 million in capital investment. So if you think about that, that's probably about 20 of our projects right now, maybe 21 fall within that. That's unprecedented for us. Typically it would be maybe 4 projects, not 21 projects. And that's part of the electric vehicle impact, because we have a lot of battery projects, but we also have a couple of very large Intel suppliers that are likely going to locate that are in there as well. So that's what I have for you. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Council members, any questions for Mr. McAllister or Mr. Director Strum?
It was enlightening.
Mr. Schnetzer? No? Okay. I have a couple questions,
Yeah.
if you would humor me a little bit. So we asked for this type of dialogue to kind of flesh out some of the pros and cons and different theories of approaches. And so I'd like to ask a couple questions just so that we can kind of have maybe a little bit more of a balanced dialogue and talk a little bit more about, I want to give you an opportunity to sort of hear what the One Columbus
Sure.
response is to some of the concerns that I think that have been raised. So first, I guess, is more of a broader question. So One Columbus is an initiative of the Columbus Partnership, right? Is that correct?
Well, we have a separate board of directors.
You have a separate board of directors.
Yes.
But Columbus 2020 came out of the Columbus
Yes.
Partnership. And is the board of directors, it's still a private board, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit to the criticism about it being a private board? And I can talk a little bit more specifically about some of the criticism if you'd like me to.
Yeah,
but,
please.
Just in terms of the way that there is sort of this strategy that's developed that is not necessarily done in a public setting, and that includes extensive subsidization of corporate activity. And could you give us like a little bit of a what has One Columbus done in response to some of the criticism? What types of changes maybe have been made? Maybe the separate board is a good way to start.
Well, one, most of our funding comes from the private sector. Majority of our funding comes from the private sector. So we have a mix of public and private sector members on our board. We have a MODE representative on our board, which represents the regional economic development groups. And we have the mayor of Columbus on our board and a county commissioner from Franklin County on our board, because those are the three largest public sector contributing groups. They account for about 25% of our funding, maybe 24% of our funding. The rest of it comes from all private sector. So the idea that, I mean, I'm not aware of much criticism of our approach. I mean, we've been pretty successful. We've gone out to all of the communities when we formed Columbus 2020. Again, when we developed the One Columbus strategy and gained input, had various meetings around the region, both public and private sector input into the strategy. So I don't think that we've had a lot of criticism, but I welcome any further dialogue on your experiences, because I'd be curious if there are much criticism out there. I'd like to definitely approach it and understand what it is, because like I said, I don't think we've been exposed to a lot of it directly.
Matt, if I may too, you mentioned MODE. I just want to highlight for those on the council who don't know what MODE is. The Mid-Ohio Development Exchange is a sister agency, nonprofit board of directors that are made up of folks just like myself. I actually serve in that capacity as the immediate past president of MODE. Jenna Goring, who is now with the city of Dublin, previously with the city of Whitehall, is the current president. And as Matt noted, we have a position on their board of directors as well. Previously it was held by Colleen Gilger, who was at the time with the city of Dublin, is now Rick Zabrick, who is the director of economic development for the 33 Corridor Partnership out of Fairfield County.
I think more in terms of the strategy of incentives and extensive kind of and extensive incentive plan, where and I think that's the bulk of the criticism that I see in the approach, and that those meetings are not necessarily they are including public representatives, but not necessarily inclusive of the public.
So
Is this public?
is this from Jobs Ohio? I mean, the Jobs Ohio incentives that you're referring to?
No, just in terms of creating the opportunities. I mean, or maybe there's a perception that, maybe a wrong perception, that One Columbus is involved with negotiating incentives between an entity, a corporate entity, and the city, the community that it's moving into.
Okay. Well, we represent the company as it relates to the incentives that are being offered by Jobs Ohio.
Okay.
And, we will obviously engage our local partners as well if they're warranted to have incentives, like a property tax abatement or, any program. We would make the company aware that there could be programs available, but we engage the local community directly. Like, I would never make an offer of incentives for the city of Gahanna. Nate, we would bring the project to Nate and say, Nate, here's an opportunity, or Director Strum, here's an opportunity.
It's fine, buddy.
And if there is an interest in pursuing this company, then you guys would have all the information that we have on the company. And you could then come to a conclusion of whether or not you want to incent the project, and then it goes back into a package. But that's exactly, I mean, we're a completely open book as it relates to the engagement with companies. And Jobs Ohio ultimately makes a decision, just like our local communities do, on what they're going to offer. We just facilitate and we project manage the deal, basically, and come together with one offer then. So it could be a Jobs Ohio offer, and it could maybe be 2 communities within our region that are, that might be vying for it, and the city of Indianapolis, for example, might be vying for it. So that's really the role that we play in incentives. We do know the programs. I mean, we know what communities are likely to do. I mean, we've done hundreds and hundreds of deals. So we can talk to a company at a high level, but when it comes down to the actual offer, it comes from the community. It's a letter signed, by Director Strum, and it's been supported by the council.
And to that point too, if I may, what you're kind of touching on, Councilwoman, is going to be actually our next session. ROI, the return on investment, and how incentives kind of play in that role. I have reached out to Price Finley and Jeff Harris from Bricker Neckler to kind of come in. They do a tag team program with the Ohio Economic Development Association that talks about how they fill the gap and how do you balance on that beam of economic incentivization and getting to make sure that the right return is coming to our community. And so that'll be highlighted in the next session as well.
Thank you. Just a kind of a sort of a related question. And does One Columbus get involved at all in standard setting in terms of how a company does business, in terms of maybe employee pay or incentives or things like that, or employee benefits?
Well, a lot of our programming that we have access through Jobs Ohio does have requirements. You have to have a set, wage. You have to have, it has to be an economic-based company. Has to be competition from outside the state of Ohio, which obviously it's not necessarily, because there could be company. Some of our local programming is more based on, if it's a new company coming in, they might be thinking about, the city of Columbus or the city of Gahanna, and they might have 2 buildings that are equal, and it just comes down to, okay, is there going to be an incentive that could be leveraged? But no, I mean, there are absolutely standards with all of our programming with Jobs Ohio, and many of our local communities have standards as well. The city of Columbus they've passed an incentive program, kind of rules and guidelines. And so, yes, I mean, every single community is a little different. But yes, there are absolutely, typically wage thresholds that you need to meet. Some require that benefits are paid, and it's only FTEs, full-time positions to qualify. So it's just, again, it varies from community to community, but absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. It's very helpful.
I have a couple of questions. As you've been speaking with all of these companies, what are some of the things that they're looking for as far as the locations they're going to that you're hearing most frequently?
So it really depends on the type of sector. So I could break it up into, like, say, a manufacturing versus an office or a logistics project. But I can tell you that the number one across the board is access to workforce. And it's not just workforce, but if you are talking about incentive programming, it doesn't have to necessarily be a tax credit. It could be a training incentive. Is becoming very popular with a lot of our communities. And it's something where you're making an investment in your population versus just the company. Because the unemployment rate's so low right now that you're recruiting a lot of people you're going to have to retrain. And so the training costs are going up for the companies as well. So access to employees and then access to some sort of training program has been pretty key. If we're talking about distribution projects, logistics projects, which, by the way, are paying about $22 an hour now on average. The new ones coming into our region, which was pretty amazing, because I remember, 10 years ago when Amazon came in and they were paying $15 an hour, a lot of our other logistics operations were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Obviously, some of our small manufacturers like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Because they weren't paying $15 an hour. They're up to 20, and many of them are advertising starting at 22. Even some of our existing companies that are trying to recruit for the peak season are even higher than 22. So
Do Warehouse work, like pick and pack work, is
Yep.
that high now? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And higher, I've actually seen it at like 28 in some of the peak seasonal demands, especially in the outlying areas, or higher.
So it's happening, and so that's also impacting the available workforce. And so, but with warehouse logistics, it's typically about the building, and having a building, having it ready, because it's a cost center for a company, right? Distributing is a cost center. It's not a revenue generator. So they need to be able to flip the switch very quickly. So if you've got space that can fit their needs, you're going to win more of those projects. And office, it's about the environment now. They want a mixed use environment, and they want to have places that their employees can eat when they come into the office, because it's a completely different world now. And so it's about space as well, but it's about having the right type of space. And we're seeing a lot of communities start to adopt this mixed use, methodology of development to accommodate that. So that could be everything from first floor retail to even having apartments and then office and kind of a mid-rise to maybe a high-rise situation. So that is where I can tell you 90% of the office projects we're working on, that's what they're looking for. That wasn't part of the conversation pre-pandemic. There were some tech companies that were focused on that, but for the most part, a lot of them were happy just coming out into the suburban communities, getting free parking, and living the dream. But that's not the case anymore, because they are all competing for the labor, and the workforce is kind of demanding that you have more of a Bridge Park, Easton-esque, or even, it doesn't have to be that scale. It could even just be, next time you do an office building, think about it, and prepare, because that's what they're looking for.
With the training incentives, are you guys working with vocational schools in the areas, and how does that work?
A lot of the programming that we have at the local level are through the county, so it would be working through the WIA boards, and it could be incumbent worker training for upskilling those that, like if someone has a new project, it would be leveraging that program, or it could be some of the training dollars they have available for new employees.
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
So to that point, Councilman, what we oftentimes have seen when we've engaged with One Columbus on workforce training programming, it's either connecting with the local high school. So here in Gahanna, we were talking to the foundation, but then also talking to our partners at Eastland Fairfield about what program they have, tying that back into either, to Matt's point, an incumbent worker training program or an elevated skills development program. So you're taking either that new onboard process and then elevating that worker. Mm-hmm. The other thing we've seen a lot of is the Tech Cred program that was done through the Governor's Office of Workforce Transformation, where quarterly we are looking at evaluating what programs are out there from a skills development standpoint and how do we accelerate those folks through those programs, and then tying that back in. That's not even a general incentive as part of what historically has been a business attraction or expansion. That's just us doing the legwork on the ground to kind of connect that Tech Cred program. And I'm happy to send that information on to anyone on the council who wants to take a look at how that works. But it's really a seamless process now, because oftentimes, whether it's Columbus State or Eastland Fairfield here in Gahanna, taking their plethora of programming that's already been certified by the state and then feeding that into the employer so that they can get reimbursed for some of their credential acceleration programming that they need.
And that's critical, because it ultimately supports, our efforts for prosperity. If we can find someone a job, it's one thing. If we can find someone a job that comes with training and a ladder that they can climb, that they literally can climb, that's completely different. And that's really kind of what we're at now. And I think we're,